Stream's looking nice and stable. Okay, Darren, can we go? Is that fine? Fine, we go. Okay, you ready, Giselle?
I'm good.
Awesome. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of DLAP, Digital League of Assessment Professionals. What is DLAP? So DLAP is a governing body where we look at assessment, and today we're talking to Giselle McIntyre. She's our guest, and we're exploring what assessment is going to look like post-COVID-19. In terms of qualification, in terms of recruitment, promotions, designations, and competencies. So Giselle, over to you, and then we'll follow a little bit later with some questions.
Good morning, everyone. I set the topic for today that if we are not going to assess something, I don't know why we are bothering to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm quite serious about that, actually, because I find that that's usually the problem, is that people will say training didn't work, or I showed him 600 times and he's still not doing it, or I'm sure that he knows how he's supposed to perform. But if you are not setting the assessment criteria, and I don't mean in an educational sentence, I mean in a standard operating procedure, and then following through with checking whether someone can do something, I don't know why you're bothering to show him in the first place. So we're going to start this morning just by talking about what assessment is. I think a lot of people think assessment is something that gets done in a learning environment, done by an assessor, and we all know that you now have registered assessors. But I think we need to think a little broader than that, and to a large extent that's what DLAP is also about, is to understand that assessment is not the job of some person whose job title is assessor. There is work for those people and there is specific things that they do, but what we are looking at more is the person who is in a work environment, who is managing or supervising people, and quite frankly is actually already assessing on a day-to-day basis. But because it's not being connected to something with the word assessment, people don't understand that that is what they are actually doing. So if you think about a cycle of learning, what would happen in an environment is that a manager would see someone in their work environment is not able to do something properly. Obviously, that is a performance issue, and any good manager would then need to deal with that. So a gap will have been identified. They'll say, okay, this guy cannot do X, Y, and Z. They'll obviously then need to do something about that. So this person will take that person through perhaps a little bit of coaching, maybe just get someone else who is able to do it properly to show them how to do it, maybe ask them to go on a formal course if it's that serious. And when they come back to the workplace, this is where the critical component comes in, is that that manager needs to then measure whether what that person has been taught or has learned or has been shown is now working. Otherwise, what was the point of going through the whole exercise to begin with? And that, in essence, is what assessment is. So I always like to think about if you get a new phone, you are going to have a lot of aspects in that phone that you don't know about. And remember, then we more likely to ask our teenagers than we are to ask someone our own age to help us with it, which also means that someone who's training us or mentoring us or coaching us is not always who we think it needs to be. It's not always the gray-haired old man, hey?
Yeah.
And whoever it is. Point is still, though, it doesn't help asking how do I now send a whatever or make a TikTok video if you don't, after you've done it, see whether you're happy with the end product. So that looking if you're happy with the end product, that is assessment. Essentially, that's what assessment is. It's not some formal thing. I know that a lot of people see assessment as hugely bureaucratic, and in a formal qualification environment, it is. It has to be. It's the only way we can quality manage. I mean, nobody wants to walk around with a qualification that everybody goes, oh no, you know, that was a pitch up and perform and then you got your certificate kind of thing. So assessment has a quality management component to it. It monitors whether someone didn't know something, was shown something, and now can do something, or still doesn't know how to do it and needs to be shown again. It's really all that it is.
Sure. Yeah, that really opens it up, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, and
I've got a question
yes.
here, and I think it kind of ties off with what you just said. Is who is supposed to assess in the workplace then? If you've just mentioned, so it's not always, it's maybe not always the senior in this case, right? So how do we identify, what's the identifying criteria in that
I
context?
think anyone who has to measure a standard operating procedure, so quite frankly, that might even be an employee themselves. So if you are doing, you know, in the old days, we used to talk about a 360 where everybody has to measure their own performance and then their manager and then their co-workers and then a customer. So all of that is essentially also assessment. I think one of the negatives of assessment as it's seen today, and it's maybe a branding issue more than anything else, is that it's extra work. It is most definitely not extra work. I agree. If you have a useless person who is not performance managing, who is not filling in the forms, who is not signing off on job cards and checking that the job is done before he signs off it, then for them it is a lot more work. But for the normal, capable, competent manager, supervisor, and employee who has to self-assess, check things off, make sure they've done something within a timeline, produced a certain amount within a certain time, all of that is actually essentially an assessor. And the workplace is actually built, designed for assessment.
So there's a lot of assessment or like organically happening already. It's kind of, in many cases, it's a mindset change in doing it, assessment to a certain criteria, right?
Correct. And I think a lot of people are not being clever with how they do it, and that's where it becomes a problem. You know, if you have 60 people on a floor that you need to check that they are doing what they need to be doing, you know, how is it that you are doing that now already? And remember, we're not talking about micromanaging, and we're not talking about mistrust and all of those kind of things. I mean, we've seen now with the new things that are going on, how many, for example, call center people are working from home. There are still enormous capacity of mainly digital, I might add, methods of checking whether someone is performing. So it's also about moving towards that output or outcome rather than the journey that it took to get there. I mean, if it takes one of your employees 3 minutes to do something and another employee 40 seconds to do something, if the something is what you are measuring, what difference does it make? I think that's one of the points connected to it. That's why assessment is sometimes seen as so negative, is because people think that it's this long, drawn out, paper-driven process. It really doesn't have to be. Design is very often the culprit here.
It's actually amazing, because thinking about it that way actually then allows the people who are self-driven to move into the positions that they need to.
Correct.
Because they're assessing a lot quicker than someone else who's maybe not driven or is happy to stay where they are.
Exactly. And I mean, if you think about it, a performance management review, when you and your manager are talking about how you've done, that's an assessment feedback session for want of another word. And what always amazes me is how many people do not prepare for those sessions. I mean, if you're going to go into your manager and he has 300 people working for him, how does he know what you do? So the only way you can show him what you do is that you have measured what you have done against what you are supposed to have done. And yes, I know job descriptions and profiles and things are not always correct. But if you've measured what you're supposed to do, then you can lead that conversation as well and say, this is what I was supposed to do. This is how much of it I did. So I'm okay. Or this is what I'm supposed to do. I can't do this thing, so I need help with this thing. Then that conversation becomes developmental in nature as well.
It's also creating a culture of learning within that context. If there's a nice outline concerning where we're going, and we are self-assessing to some degree because we want to get to that goal, just asking that question within the workplace actually moves us in the right direction. Love that. What is the difference between assessment in education and business? So just in those two different sectors.
Quite frankly, just the terminology. The assessment in terms of education is connected to 3 levels of competence, and they are quite defined in the sense that you start with the foundational or formative foundational stuff, the stuff that you know and understand. Always use an example. If you have to answer the telephone, the first thing that you want to show anyone how to do in terms of answering the phone, and that would be both educationally and in a workplace, is that they must know what a telephone is. They must know, the basics of how it works, what you need to do with it, those kind of things. But you also need to, for example, understand the policy of your company. You need to have knowledge connected to how you're supposed to answer the phone. That's the first level. The next level is the practical competence itself, and that specifically is connected to being able to pick up the phone and say, good morning, Giselle McIntyre, how can I help you? That is, in some environments, the practical component takes a much longer period to learn, and in other places, it's a much simpler process. And once you've got that practical competence, then you move to the final level of competence, which is referred to as reflexive competence. We say it's a little bit like a reflex. When you change the gears in your car, you are not really thinking about putting in the clutch, changing the gears anymore. You had to practice that a number of times, but once you get going with it, you're not really thinking about it anymore. Now, when a car rides fast in front of you, your reflexes kick in, change the gears, put the brake on, steer away. So there's a combination of things that start happening all at once, and that's reflexive competence. It also is then connected to your behavior and your attitudes and your values and your sense of ethics. That's why training in ethics, for example, can be difficult in a workplace or in an educational environment, because you're actually looking at the highest level of competence where you transfer what do I know and understand, what can I do, into different scenarios at different times where we have to think about things in a different way. Now, that description fits both in the world of work and in the world of education. Pure knowledge and university-based curriculums are connected to knowledge and understanding, and nowadays, to a certain extent, they're starting to bring work-integrated learning in. The occupational qualifications, so the QCTO, CETA environments, deal with applied knowledge because it is supposed to be workplace-orientated, occupationally directed. It's the whole point. So assessments in those components are connected then to applied knowledge, which then becomes applied competence. So those are the words that get used in an education or a training and development environment. But it's the same thing when you take it back to the workplace and you're now simply just saying the person can now answer the phone the way they're supposed to, follows the rules, answers the phone when no one is looking. That's always the final measure. So I can answer the phone, able to do it, know how to answer it, know what I'm supposed to say, why I'm supposed to say it. But if the boss is not there, will I still answer the phone? So that's that reflexive competence that comes at the end, which is very often measured in the workplace as behavioral or attitudinal. Same thing, just different words.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a level where you don't think about it anymore. It's become part of company culture also, almost. Yeah. There's a saying that says you must keep trying till you get it right. And then once you get it right, you must keep trying till you can't get it wrong. It's that mindset,
Correct.
especially making it part of the mechanics of the business.
Correct.
How do we practically, at this time, review or change what we are measuring? I think that's referring to the fact that we are kind of in this transition period where we forced to look at things differently. How do we what's the right word, institutionalize that? How do we practically at this time review or change what we are measuring?
I think that if I'm understanding it correctly, the point is that we have to measure and review a whole bunch of different things. And what we have reviewed up until now, to a large extent, quite frankly, has been micromanaged to a large extent. So, you know, the person has to do 60 forms in a day. The manager is checking each form. We have to get to a point of going, okay, are we going to check that there's 60 forms, or are we going to check each form? So we have to start becoming clever in terms of how we do things. I mean, if you think of the difference between a barcode and having to type in the price, I mean, it happens still when you know, not that we're allowed to go to the shops much nowadays, but when you go to the shop and they go tick, tick, it's fast, eh? Now, that's also an assessment, by the way, okay? And there's a timeline connected to that. There's workflow connected to that. But when the barcode doesn't work, then the person has to type it in. Now, a whole different set of skills come into play. And that also needs to be assessed. But is it important to assess? And I think that's really what companies need to understand is, please stop assessing unimportant things. I was coaching and doing assessment training at a company a little while ago, a chemical company, and their standard operating procedure says that they need to put the container that they're working with on their left-hand side and then put the stuff into the mixer that they're doing it. And I asked them, why does it have to be on the left-hand side? I don't understand why it has to be on the left-hand side. None of them can answer. But if they don't put the container on the left-hand side, they get marked down on their performance. Now, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, what are you measuring? Quite frankly, most of us are right-handed. It would be simpler biologically, physiologically, to put it in from the right-hand side if you're right-handed. So a lot of what we are measuring is wasteful. And I also then put some of that blame in with the managers and the operational people who have and are still using things from 1920. I mean, really, you're still measuring whether someone can send a fax.
Yeah, sure. I think just to follow on that topic, I was just speaking to a business that I closely work with the other day. So what has happened, they obviously, their admin team, they need access to each other and to their warehouse to do their job. So at the moment, they've gone into everyone that is in an admin position is currently just attending online training. I think this ties back into this assessing that looks actually quite different now because you're not seeing the person face to face. I mean, I think that ties back to this question: how do you practically assess that person? I think it's slightly different now because you're not seeing the manager's not seeing his workers on a daily basis. So assessment is now looking slightly different in the sense of this online training that they've done. How much have they actually taken home, and how much can they apply? I think it's going to be an interesting challenge in going forward, because as we've now just seen with this lockdown, we're not out of lockdown yet. We're kind of continuing with this lockdown, and I think even as it opens up, it's going to be maybe skeleton staff for a little while, and then moving forward, and the people that can work from home is going to have to. It puts an interesting spin on this as, I mean, how does the manager actually assess whether the work has been done correctly without micromanaging that situation?
And I think that's exactly the point connected to assessment. You know, whenever I go in and I'm doing an analysis in a business, one of the things managers will say is the training was useless. And my question is then always, what do you mean by that? In other words, what was before and what is now? In other words, what is the after? And usually then people can't answer. So the idea is that a lot of, and I'm sorry, but it is that way, and it's why training sometimes has such a bad name, is that because it's not measured, people will have an opinion about it, honestly, based on the food they were given, which now in an online scenario is very interesting. I'd like to see the reports now. Whether there was two-ply toilet paper, you know, whether they got real orange juice or not, instead of whether the outcomes of what it was that they were on the training for were met. Now remember, micro-learning, which is part of the digital learning component, is the perfect answer, I suppose, to a large extent for that, because we learn best in terms of what we need to learn. And not only adults, everybody. But if I need to know how to open something, I will immediately make an effort to learn how to do that. I will put it into practice and immediately assess whether I can do it or not. And if I get it right, I won't forget it again. Perfect learners, we are built to perfect learners. But it has to then be assessed at the end of it. So when a manager is saying, please go and do these online courses, a lot of managers are now doing. What is happening now, the person can switch the computer on and walk away. And the measure not good enough. Okay. Doesn't help having attendance registers. You them to apply it in some way.
Sure, that's good. I've got one more question here. I think we've got 8 minutes left. Why do we do what we do? Has COVID-19 created opportunity that we can begin reviewing why we do this and how? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think, and I suppose I am one of those eternal optimists, which can be very irritating to the pessimists among us. But the point is that this whole COVID-19 has highlighted a lot of things that a lot of people have actually been saying for a long time. So perhaps the voices are just shouting a little louder than before, but it's not so new. I mean, I've been advising training skills development companies for years. And for years, I've been saying, please, you need to understand, pulling 30 people out of a workplace into a classroom for a week at a time is an impossibility in terms of performance. Our productivity cannot manage it. Most companies are at bare skeleton already before COVID. Can you imagine what's going to happen now? So if we don't start rethinking how we are doing this, learn just in time. I mean, the just in time concept has been around for forever, but the concept remains that that's how we learn best, is when we need something that we have it immediately. And what is the one thing everybody has? A phone. And I mean, it's important to understand that we can meet a lot of people's needs, not everybody's needs. Can't keep everybody happy all the time anyway. We can meet a lot of people's needs by both training and then, more importantly, assessing what they're doing just in time when they need it. I read an article this morning. It's an actually PhD that's just been done. Interestingly, now PhD takes 2-3 years to write. He's just publishing it now. And what is he saying in it? That we have from the traditional methodologies that we are using in terms of learning as a whole. So 3 years ago, he was obviously researching it. And we have to move. We have to move away. COVID has, to a large extent, pushed it onto us, but people don't like change. Don't let anyone tell you they like change. Nobody likes change. So the resistance connected to it is part of that. So honestly, build a bridge, get over it. Let's get on with our lives in the new normal.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I can relate to that as well. As being a trainer is also how different people learn differently. Sometimes you need to just change a word or explain it from a different angle for that person to understand. I was just thinking about that while you were talking. We have 5 minutes left. Any closing remarks concerning something we maybe didn't, a topic we didn't touch, or something that you wanted to mention?
I think perhaps just one of my passions is recognition of prior learning, and RPL is still considered the ugly stepdaughter's sister's cousin of everything to a large extent. And I think we need to start realizing that as people start implementing assessment in their work environments for themselves, not even with their managers or whatever, you need to understand the day you then come to me and are asking me to RPL you towards a full qualification, a designation, you want promotion, whatever the case may be, you are making both of our lives a lot easier. So don't leave assessment and measurement up to other people. And I think that's important for all of us to start learning, is that your own ability to self-assess yourself against standards and measurements is very important. If you have a consulting mindset, I've always said you're a little spoiled by this process because you already understand that. You have to measure what you do so that you can prove it, so that you can get paid. When you've been working in a very traditional environment up until now, you've let someone else measure it for you. So I've got to do 50 of these things, but I don't have to count it. My manager counts it. And we have to stop that mindset, not only for the managers and the workplace and the assessments and the measurements and all of that, but for you as a person as well. If you want to grow in your own environment with your own CV and your own promotions or your own professional designations, you have to start measuring yourself against a standard, not against other people, against a standard. And sure, if there is no standard, then shout and shout loudly about it, because how else can you measure something? Hey, there needs to be a standard. Sure. South Africa is spoiled. We measured all of our qualifications against international benchmarks. We're one of the few countries in the world that did that. And that means that we have a lot of standards we can measure against. Assessment designers are not a dime a dozen. RPL advisors, all of these are assessment practitioners. Let them help you to design what you need in your work environment so that you can do it. You and your staff can do it, not other people.
Sure. We've got 2 minutes left, so I need to wrap this up. That's amazing. That's really inspired me. So it's thinking about where you're going with your career in your own context and actually evaluating yourself. That also it's gonna make sure that you actually end up in the right business, right? And you don't just leave it up to someone else, because you're thinking about where I'm at, what's been my previous experience, and then going like, does this actually fit into this business? Do these people think in the same way? Are we going in the same direction? It's actually empowering. It's so empowering thinking about it in that context. Great. Awesome. Thank you very much, Giselle. Appreciate your time. We are out of time, so I'm going to have to let you go. But that was amazing. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Well, cheers.
Bye-bye.
Great. We off. Hey.
How's it?
Good, man. How are you?
That was great. Thanks.
I'm just quickly want to see. Okay, you can stop the online thing. We're back to our holding slide.
Great. I'm gonna stop recording.
Sure, that was